When kids just won't listen, parents often feel stuck between two choices: to give in or get angry. It's exhausting. We give you the top techniques directly from the experts, helping you on your path to a more peaceful, respectful, and joyful life with your kids. Today's topic is about getting teenagers to listen. We all know that adolescence is a period of rapid changes. Between the ages of 12 to 17, for example, a parent ages as much as 20 years. Thank you. I had help writing that joke. Today's guest, Sara Chesley, is a licensed therapist, and she helps mostly teenagers, mostly girls, with eating disorders, also anxiety, depression. Her practice is out of Charleston, South Carolina, where I'm recording from. And I personally don't have much experience or knowledge working with kids with eating disorders, so I will be asking her plenty of basic questions to figure out how we can identify them and what to do about this sometimes subtle but life-threatening situation. And just to give you the kind of first response information that I gathered, Sara says if there is an eating disorder, the first place to go is to a primary care physician, and that they should be able to do some blood work and give an assessment there. There's lots of other good info on this one, so let's get to it. Welcome to the show, Sara Chesley. We're going to dive right in with my favorite first question. What is it that you love about working with kids?
Wow, that's a great question. So, primarily the clients I see are in the 12 to, 12 to 18-year-old range. So I love adolescents, I love teens, and I think the reason that they're so interesting and so much fun is that they're really honest. And you never really have to wonder if they're telling you the truth or not when they're going off about one of their problems. They're very transparent, and I just find that they always have so many interesting stories to share. And sometimes with adults, I think they're more concerned with how they're appearing to the therapist, and kids don't care what you think, and so you get some really interesting information out of them. So I've always really enjoyed that demographic.
Yes, the teenagers, that is a group that I have shied away from. Difficult for me, so I have a lot to learn from you. What's the main thing that you have learned from working with that group of kids?
I think one of the main things I've learned is that teenagers really don't have a lot of foresight into long-term consequences. And of course, we know that clinically, but I think they're very much living day to day in the moment. And as parents, we often will want to guide our teens and say, if you make these choices down the road, here's the consequence. But that doesn't really resonate with them. That doesn't affect what's going to happen to them tomorrow at school. That's not what's necessarily the most important thing to them. And so I think validating them being where they are, how far in the future they can actually see, and really addressing just their day-to-day concerns and being there and being present. I think that that's just so important clinically and as a parent.
Do you know when that does come online, that kind of, or does it ever come online that's reasonable to help someone by saying, hey, 5 years from now, the cigarettes will kill you? Or
Sure. And you're right. For some adults, that's still, we have plenty of people doing unhealthy or dangerous behaviors as adults. But yeah, your brain really does grow until your mid-20s. So the part of the brain that's really going to help you think about those long-term consequences, it happens certainly long after you've left the nest, so to speak. Some kids are going to grasp it sooner than others, and it is important to still talk about those things, but that's not going to be a primary motivator in getting a child to make any kind of changes today, because like I said, really trying to make it through the day, and they've got so many pressures and so many things going on in their life that is what is going to matter to them.
So you have been working directly with teenagers in a clinical environment where you're seeing kids who have eating disorders.
Yes, and just as like a little background, I started that training after graduate school in Boston. I started in an intensive outpatient eating disorder clinic, and that's where I really was trained and was my first real exposure to that population, and loved it. And then when I moved to Charleston, I did a lot of in-home therapy through private practice, going into teenagers' homes with their families and doing the counseling in their homes. And then for the last over 7 years, I've been the director of Charleston Jewish Family Services, which is a nonprofit here in Charleston. And that's where I've been doing a lot of counseling and seeing a lot of those teenage eating disorder clients and families.
So just so I understand, if someone is noticing an eating disorder in their child, they'll bring them to you. I'm just wondering what that environment looks like. Is the kid typically, fighting the process, or what challenges do you generally face in that scenario?
That's a great question. So if I get just a cold call from a parent saying, I've noticed my child's either lost weight or isn't eating, or there's been some kind of change in their diet or their mood, the very first thing I always tell parents to do is to go see their primary care physician. That is step number one, because depending on how they are physically, an eating disorder is both a physical and mental disorder. A doctor might say that a child needs a higher level of care, in which case I would not be seeing that client. If they're medically stable and it's just a lot of, they want some outpatient support to get around some of the thoughts and the behaviors, then that would be an appropriate client to come see me. And one of the main things that I insist upon in taking on any eating disorder teenager client is that their parents or caretakers have to be involved, because they are the ones who are in the home. They're the ones who really are with their child. They're going to be their number one supporter. They're going to be the ones overseeing their nutrition and food. So yes, I do see the teens individually, but there's a lot of family work, because an eating disorder affects the whole family. And it's so important that everyone's really involved in the process, or you can't really make progress.
So when they come to you, the family's the one who's making that call initially, right?
Yes, it's almost always a parent. If the client is under the age of 18, it's very rare, that I would get a call from a teenager.
What are the challenges that you find with the typical kid who's coming in to see you when it comes to just communicating with them, or the family communicating with them, that they're reporting?
So what typically you'll find, especially when you have an initial session with parents and a child, is the parents will say, my kid just won't listen to me. I'm telling him or her to eat, they're not doing it. I'm threatening to take away everything they have. I've taken away their sports. It's not working. They're not listening, and they're refusing to eat. They're refusing to sit with the family. So there is a complete breakdown in relationships and communication, because an eating disorder can really, like I said, affect everyone in the family, siblings included. And sometimes siblings will be jealous that the client is taking up all their parents' energy and resources and time, and that creates resentment. And the siblings need to be able to express those feelings and understand their role, or they might feel responsible for taking care of their sick sibling. So yeah, there's a lot of communication breakdown. There's a lot of family roles that have to be reestablished. And the whole basis of an evidence-based treatment plan, or Maudsley, which is what I follow, is that the parents are the head unit in charge and they have to be aligned. They have to completely come together while taking care of the child with the eating disorder and really be that unified front. And that's what ultimately kind of takes that power dynamic and restructures the family in a more effective.
Okay, can you go into detail about that? You called it Maudsley?
For a long time, there wasn't a lot of research done about eating disorder treatment, and most people would just go and see a therapist and talk about it, but there weren't great success rates. Maudsley is a method. It actually came out of a hospital in England. That's where the word comes from, where they were doing this treatment. And that really, there's a lot more to it, but again, it's back to a family-based treatment where parents are in charge of monitoring their children's food and eating, just like they were when they were 2 and 3 years old. They are put back in charge. The eating disorder client is not allowed at the beginning to make their own food or to have any, real decision making around it. And it's basically taking that stress away from the child with the eating disorder and letting their parents caretake until they are at a point where they've weight restored and they're healthy enough to then start taking some of those responsibilities back. So it's a very long process. There's different stages and phases to it, but it's very effective. And so that's why it's so important to know who's overseeing your eating disorder treatment, and you want someone who really does understand the evidence-based programs because they have the highest success rates.
When I'm talking to people about working with 3-year-olds, there's a lot of kind of tips and tricks that we talk about to try something new. And I feel like there's always this kind of optimism that we can redirect things, no problem. And when you're dealing with a 17-year-old, and like you said, you have a history in the family of poor communication or just a lot of kind of breakdowns. Does it take years to work on these things, or what's the process like in a general timeline that you feel like you can see big changes in a family, positive changes?
It's a great question. And I think the answer is the effectiveness of the treatment really is dependent upon the parents adhering to the program, because the consistency is really what's key. So if you have 2 parents who come in from day one and say, we are taking back control over the food, we are going to enforce certain consequences if it doesn't happen, we are really united, and we're going to give our child the same answer no matter who she asks, to bend the rules, it's not going to happen. So if you have that kind of parenting unit, you're probably going to see results a lot quicker. Now, it's easier said than done because there's a lot of guilt associated, and a lot of parents don't want to upset their child. They don't want to come off as being too harsh or too punitive. And so you get a lot of mixed messages, and that does, unfortunately, slow down progress sometimes. So it is hard, and that's why it's so important that the parents get so much support from the therapist that reinforces that they're doing the right thing and they're doing it for the health of their child. And I always sort of compare it to, if your child had cancer, then you wouldn't let your child say, I'm not going to have chemo, I'm not going to have my medication. You would say, I'm sorry you're doing this. But with eating disorders, even though it does have the only mental illness with a high mortality rate, parents still feel very unsure of enforcing this kind of treatment, and the treatment is the food and the eating. So sometimes, I think it's so important that parents get a lot of support to understand that and reframe what they're going through, because it is challenging. It's not easy to take back control over a 17-year-old's diet the way you did when they were 3. Nobody wants to do that. It feels strange to kind of go back in time and reparent them, but that's what they need. So, it's a lot for the parents. I really believe that their buy-in is so crucial to the success of the treatment.
Well, now we're going to squeeze it all in 10 minutes, that process. I'm joking, but I just want to kind of point out that the depth of that and that I understand there isn't it's not necessarily a simple tip or a trick, and the solving these communication problems, it's worth having a specialist, even if you're not dealing with an eating disorder. When you have a teenager and you have these habits that have gone back that far, I mean, would you say that that's in general a specialist, a therapist of some type, is going to be able to help around communication primarily?
Absolutely. I mean, my background, so I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, but family to me, that part of the clinical work is everything. And even if I'm just working, regardless of my clientele, for teens, for adults, I think having other family members in a session and really having that time to focus on old patterns or challenges and having a neutral party be there to guide these conversations, I really feel so passionately that that is the quickest and most effective way to create change, because nobody lives in a vacuum. So the more people we can put around the client, and so I can see their world and see their relationships and where there might be a bit of a disconnect or breakdown, it's so much more effective. And I mean, the best days in my office are when there's 5 people sitting around a circle, because you can just get so much farther along in such a quicker amount of time. And I love being efficient. So that's certainly my preference. Can't always work out, but certainly could try.
When a parent is saying to you that they followed the program and the teenager just isn't listening, just isn't buying in or going along with them, where do you look first? And how do you start uncovering the problem and helping them out there?
Great question. The first thing I think is figuring out your teenager's why. Why would it benefit them to get better? What are they going to gain by getting healthy? What is their life going to look like when they can go out and have a burger and fries with their friends on a Friday night in high school? If your child doesn't have a why or have any incentive to change, that's really where you need to start, because everybody has something that they want. And I think making a teenager especially feel in control of that, because if you're already taking away their option to meal plan and eat what they want, you've got to find where they do have control. And that's everything from, you got to pick out what you wore to school today. You got to pick out who you had lunch with at school and who you talked to during the day. So reinforcing, number one, that there are a lot of things that they do have control over. Number two, figuring out what's motivating them. And three, I really do believe that parents feel so much guilt about taking away things that they think their child can't be without. But the reality is, and it sometimes has come to this in extreme cases, the only thing you really have to give your child is a bed and clothes to wear and food. So everything else in their world that they have, those are all extras. Those are all luxuries. Those are all gifts, and probably things that the parents have given and bought for their child in most cases. So if it comes to them really not complying and you're just not making any headway, I mean, I've had parents take the doors off their child's bedroom because that's a luxury and it's their house and they can do that. If your child values privacy, then that might be what's effective for your child. And of course they can earn it back. And it does seem really punitive, but especially with eating disorders, like I said, this is a disease that can kill your child, and there's not a lot of time to sort of let it slide. So sometimes you do, in this case, have to do more extreme things to make sure your child's being safe. And again, that's why it's hard for parents. They don't want their kids to be angry with them. But I always say an angry kid is better than a hospitalized kid. And just reinforcing that message, I think, does kind of make it feel a little bit more doable.
Right. And the anger, well, like you said, anger is preferable to being hospitalized. The anger is something you're going to deal with for a day or a week. But the long-term consequences of whatever behavior they're engaging in, could be really, really awful and something you're dealing with forever.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I used to, when I first got my driving license, I would, it was a toy and I was breaking all the laws on the road and kept getting tickets and stuff. And they never took my keys away. They never, they bought me the car and they never said, okay, no more. And I just always thought, why? I mean, even at that age, I was almost asking for them to take it away from me.
Yes, isn't that so interesting? As a teenager, you wanted the boundary because boundaries keep you safe, and they make you feel
I certainly
safe.
I certainly would have kicked and screamed when they did that if they had done that. And that may have, how long that would have lasted, like, a few days,
Right.
maybe a day. I would be really, really angry. I normally don't share my own personal anecdotes because obviously it's not your child, but, and that also shows how not having a consequence also has consequences, because
Absolutely.
that actually affected our relationship. That affected who I am and how I am today, that I didn't get that kind of, hard no where I deserved one.
No, I think that's a great example. And boundaries are a way to show love. And I think when parents can hear that from a professional and feel okay about it, because not everyone was raised with that, or they think that rules or saying no is too restrictive, but it is a way of showing love and keeping people safe. And certainly with any kind of mental disorder, whether it's eating disorders or depression or anxiety, whatever a parent has to do to keep their kids safe, that's their job, and that is showing love.
When parents are looking for what is motivating their child and they're just feeling really distant and they just say, oh, I don't know, nothing motivates my child. Do you ever hear that? Oh, you don't understand my kid. They really don't want to do any of this stuff.
But you can take away anything and my kid won't care.
Right,
I've
right.
heard that a few times. That's
Uh-huh.
usually when the door comes off their room and they're like, oh, my kid really cares about that. That
Right.
was really a wake up call for them. But usually it's social time, technology. Obviously, if you take a kid's cell phone, most kids today are really going to care because that is their connection to everything. So that sports is usually a huge one. And certainly if they're medically compromised, a doctor will make a call whether someone's healthy enough to participate in sports. But if they are healthy enough, but they're not eating enough food to be able to stay healthy while doing it, then, that's something that a lot of my teenagers have had taken away from being advised from medical professionals. So there's always something, always. So it might take a few tries, it might be trial and error, but one of those things will usually be enough for them to get a big shift in their reality that they don't have something they really want. And if it motivates them enough, then they're going to realize. And again, that means that the parent has to hold steady. You can't just take a phone for a day and then kind of give in. If you're going to take it, you have to take it until the behavior changes or you've lost all your credibility. So you don't want to threaten that you're going to take away a cell phone for a year if you're not really going to do that. You want to make it something that's attainable and effective. And it's not hurting your child. Your child will survive without a door. Your child
Right.
will survive without a cell phone. They will survive being off the sports team for a while. Might not feel that way, but they will. So again, that idea that all you really have to do as a parent is give them a place to sleep, give them food, give them a roof over their head, that everything else is extra. And when you kind of think about it like that, you see how much they really have. And there's a lot of leverage there.
I'll just keep playing devil's advocate. So, as a parent, one might be thinking, well, shoot, now I've taken this away. Now I have to do all this extra legwork to make up. I needed my kid to have that phone and to have the keys to the car and all these things because, now I have to do triple duty parenting. And I wonder if they're imagining that that's just going to be going on forever because there won't be any results. What do you have to tell them when they're in that place of just kind of despair around their own idea of what it's going to look like to enforce some of these harder consequences?
It is so challenging for these parents. Being the parents of somebody who is battling a life-threatening mental illness with physical consequences, I mean, it is draining, it is frustrating, it is exhausting. You're going to doctors, you're going to nutritionists, you're going to the therapist, you are fighting potentially through multiple meals a day, you are having arguments, there's tension. I mean, I give parents all the credit in the world. This is not easy at all. It is very challenging. Sometimes couples even split up because they can't get on the same page around the child's eating disorder. It can cause that much stress in a family. So yeah, I think you just have to empathize and say this is part of a bigger journey. And yes, this is really unfair that, not with the child in the room, but separately with parents, it's very unfair that you have to go through this. This is very hard. You are having to make some serious sacrifices. And yet, at the end of your child's graduation, do you want them to be able to go away to college and have a life? Or are they going to still be battling an eating disorder and miss out on the person that they were always meant to be? So you have to, again, open it up and look at some short-term sacrifices for what they really ultimately want for their child. And everyone wants the same thing for their child. They want them to be happy and healthy. And if that's the goal, we've got to make it through. And parents need support. They need to see counselors, if they need individual counselors, if they need couples therapy. It's hard. This is a very challenging disorder. And that's why you got to make sure you've got a really strong team around you because it can't all just fall on the parents.
It's interesting that you said, having that conversation about how tough it is or unfair, maybe with the child not in the room. And while I'm sure that's best practice and agree with that, I imagine that when the teenage child sees that the parent is having to work triple hard now to do these extra steps to take care of the child, I can imagine a teenager saying to themselves, "This is unfair. This is a lot of extra work," and possibly seeing that and responding in a positive way and recognizing that their decisions will cost their parents, and their parents will go to the ends of the earth for them. I think sometimes the gravity of all of that can help the teenagers. Am I just making that up, or do you?
No, you're right on and I think you see that definitely in the 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Again, they have that ability to empathize a little bit more than maybe somebody who's 12. And sometimes the guilt is definitely something that has to be addressed with the teenager because a lot of them feel really guilty. They say, my parents are so stressed out. I know how expensive eating disorder treatment is. Now they can't go on their trip and I've prevented X, Y, and Z. And especially the farther along they get in treatment and the healthier they get, then they really can look back and say, oh, wow, this was a huge sacrifice on all of us. This was a really very hard chapter to go through. And that's part of the healing and that's part of the discussion. And it's also reinforcing that this is what parents do to show love. And this is what it looks like to love someone. You stand through them, through their health battles, and that's what your parents did for you. And how can you now live your life in a healthy way so that they know it was worth it? how can you keep yourself healthy, keep yourself on track, keep yourself motivated so that this wasn't for nothing. So that can be used certainly with the older teenagers as they're going through the process and having a little bit more mental clarity around how their actions have affected the rest of the family.
Right. So a little bit of that guilt may be healthy and helpful, but you
a little healthy guilt.
Yes, but you wouldn't want to. That's different from guilt tripping them and saying, "Oh gosh, look what you're making me do," over and over. So I'm sure you can help people walk that line. I have some questions about just, I'm not sure that I would be able to recognize in a lot of children if they're dealing with an eating disorder. What are some of the basics that every parent should look out for, even if they are only have a 2-year-old right now, and maybe it's just not really an issue for them today, but something that they should be looking out for? What are some of the basics around that?
It's almost always the parents who are going to notice first with an eating disorder. And what's tricky is that sometimes things happen so slowly that they just wake up one day and say, "Oh my gosh, my child looks so thin." And it's happened so slowly over time, and they didn't see it, because if you see your child every single day, sometimes it's not as drastic. And sometimes it's people who haven't seen you in a few months and they say, "Oh my gosh, your child looks really thin. Did they lose a lot of weight?" So some of the things, certainly if somebody else comments, might be a little red flag, maybe not, but something just to kind of look at. You want to just notice any changes in their patterns. Sometimes eating disorders can be really sneaky, but more times than not, parents do notice. A child will say that they're going to only eat gluten-free food, or they're only going to be vegan from now on, or they're making some kind of change, and it might sound positive at first. And that's what can be so challenging. A child who, might be wanting to get healthy and say, from now on, I'm not going to have dessert at dinner, or whatever they used to do. If they're making any kind of change, just watch it. You want to make sure that it's not so rigid that they don't have any balance in their eating. Because a lot of times eating disorders will sort of occur out of some very well-intentioned dietary choices out of a child. That they want to try the latest fad diet, and then it just gets out of control. And it's just something to be aware of. So changes in their eating behavior, their eating patterns. Are they skipping lunch at school? And that's all for anorexia. For bulimia, or overeating or binge eating, do you see your kids with wrappers all over the floor in their room and you don't remember seeing them eat? Just anything that just raises a little red flag or seems out of character for your child. It doesn't mean that your child has an eating disorder. It's just something to watch, and always have open communication about healthy eating, about balance, about how it's okay to have dessert and it's okay to have ice cream with your friends. And there shouldn't be any talk around good food, bad food. It should always be in the frame of balanced. And balanced food means sometimes you're going to eat too much in one day, and some days maybe you didn't eat enough, and you got to kind of get yourself into balance. And it's hard, and even as adults, you know that people struggle. So to have a child learn, they really do need those role models, and we want to make sure they're not getting their dietary advice from their peers or from the internet. We want to model good eating for them at home.
Feel free to skip this next question, but what advice do you hear, or just common phrases or ideas thrown around, that you think people should not be following in this field?
I think especially for working with eating disorder clinicians, the only thing I really would warn people about is making sure that your clinician, like I said, is really trained and knowledgeable about eating disorders. It is a specialty area, and it's not something that just because somebody went to graduate school or has a degree, it doesn't mean they know the best ways to treat it. And for a long time, talk therapy was thought as eating disorder treatment, and that is not an effective way to help a teenager go through an eating disorder and get better. So you do really want to make sure you have somebody who is trained, does evidence-based treatment, involves a family unit. And I think that really just requires doing your research and making sure that you're not wasting your time and your resources. And every minute counts sometimes with an eating disorder, and there is no time to waste. So I think that all clinicians might have the best of intentions, and it's not that anyone's trying to scam you or harm you, but you just want to make sure that your clinician is a good fit for your family.
So when I see the YouTube video of the diet and wellness coach, that's who has no other credentials, that's not someone I should be following for such serious matters.
Absolutely. You want somebody who is clinically trained, who has a license, and that is very, very important, because you will find somebody who can claim that they will fix everything, but that's just not the way to go when you are dealing with a life or death illness.
What are some resources that you recommend?
One of the best resources that I love to send parents to is maudsleyparents.org. And that's just got lots of articles. It has treatment information. It'll help you link up with local resources for you. It gives you information about all the warning signs for different types of eating disorders if you are concerned. That's just one of my favorites. So maudsleyparents.org is great. And the book that I really like for parents, it's called Help Your Teenager Beat an Eating Disorder, and that's by James Locke and Daniel LaGrange. And basically that book just gives a lot of practical advice from a parent who had a daughter with an eating disorder, and can kind of walk you through working with a treatment team and how you become united with your partner to help your child and all of that. So that's also a great resource for parents.
Great. We'll put links to all that. We'll put links to you and everything here. Can you spell that out, the Maudsley?
Sure. It's MAUDSLEY, parents, plural.org.
Okay. Wow, I was so off. I'm wondering how many of our listeners had that one right.
Probably not many.
All right. Do you have any local events or anything that you'd like to talk to us about, or invite the locals to, or where can we find more about you?
Well, if anyone is interested in speaking with me, the best way to reach me is at charlestonjfs.org is my agency. You can also find me at charlestonfamilycounseling.org. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Sara Chesley.
Great. And before we sign off, do you have any parting thoughts? Anything that you wish we talked about that we didn't get to?
I think that I would just leave in saying that teenagers are really just trying to figure out their place in the world, and they need a lot of validation and a lot of listening. I think as parents, we want to ask a lot of questions to get our information from them, but it's so much more effective to just try and broach conversation and pull the information you need out of that. And a lot of parents will say, I don't know anything about my kids. I ask how their day was. I ask what they're doing and what they need. And I just think that with teenagers, it's so much more important to find activities that you both like and do family events and spend as much time building those relationships outside of treatment, outside of an illness, outside of any kind of mental health issues, and just let's talk to them the way that you would want to be listened to. And I think that every parent has the capability of really reaching their teens and help them grow into the adults that they were always meant to be.
Yeah, you're never too old to play. There's a million ways to play and to engage, whether it's with teens or with your grandparents or anything.
Absolutely.
I have one quick kind of technical question about you said about referring to primary care physicians first.
Yes.
And I was thinking if a parent is maybe getting a little resistance there, or well, that doctor didn't really notice much, or maybe that doctor didn't, doesn't have that kind of specialty or attention to that. Is there a phone number? Is there some other quick resource that they could just talk to somebody if their primary care doctor is either unavailable, or for some reason that a wall is coming up there?
I can't think of one at the moment off the top of my head, but I do encourage parents, if they don't feel like their needs are being addressed with their primary care, and it could be just because a lot of primary care doctors are also not as knowledgeable about eating disorders and screenings, to always get a second opinion if they're unsure. They should know their child's BMI. They should get blood work done, because most doctors will at least do that, and that's really where it needs to start, and make sure that their heart is healthy and check their blood pressure. So if your doctor's not doing the bare minimum of those kind of things, you definitely want a second opinion if you are concerned.
All right. Well, I don't have any other questions for you. It's been a very enlightening conversation. It's outside of the usual realm of where I work. And so I feel like I could ask you a million questions, but I think we've said enough. And if anyone is having any concerns about their child or anyone in their life with an eating disorder, call somebody who's a specialist in this area, and talk to your primary care physician.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Sure. Thanks for being here, and thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye, Sarah.
Bye-bye.